This is Celia Lacayo, once again with LA Social Science as the Associate Director of Community Engagement for Social Sciences, and I also teach in the African American Studies Department and Chicana Central American Studies Department. Today we have an amazing treat in honor of Latino Heritage Month, but just really in honor of looking at the diversity and amazingness of Latinidad, specifically Afro-Latinos. So first I'm gonna quickly do a genesis of how the Afro-Latino class came to be at UCLA. And this included a long history, of course, of people that come before me. And I felt simply as the catalyst and honored to teach that course that is now embedded in the curriculum. And we had folk like Walter Thompson Hernandez, who did a beautiful project on looking at Blaxicans in Los Angeles through photography and really situating Afro-Latinos in the West Coast, Southwest, Southern California, Los Angeles, and now a class at UCLA. So it's these really understanding context and region and time matter. I heavily rely upon the brilliant edited volume of the Afro-Latino Reader, who's this year's 10-year anniversary, and so still remains so critical. And this is edited by Miriam Jimenez Roman and Juan Flores, who have a huge body of work of research on Afro-Latinos. And so one of the critical things that they begin with right off the bat that many people don't know is that in fact that the Afro-Latino presence in the United States predates not only the nation's founding, but also the first English settlements. Eager to escape the caste restrictions that limited their social and economic possibilities, they were among the first to respond to the Spanish Crown's call for settlers to the sparsely populated areas of present-day Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas. And so if you know your Los Angeles history, California history, you know that some of the first settlers here were actually Afro-Latino. And the fact that most folks don't know that it's not in our history books, is a reflection of the erasure of Blackness in Latin America and these anti-Black sentiments. A lot of folks, again, assume that Afro-Latinos simply live in the Caribbean, when in fact, Afro-Latinos have large populations in Mexico, Central America, all over South America, and of course the Caribbean. So really wanting again to think about the importance of all the contributions of Afro-Latinos. That year, 2018, that I first taught that class, we thought we would have 50 students. We had almost 100. There was a real demand, a real hunger for students at UCLA, mostly Latino, to really want to know about their own history as it pertained to African descent, both in Latin America and in the US. And that year, I met two amazing young women, both UCLA students, one an undergraduate, Kai, who took my course, and is the founder of the first Afro-Latino student organization group, one of the few in the entire country, and Brisa, who came my way through the World Arts and Culture Department as a PhD student to be the teaching assistant of the course, and the students loved her. She does a guest lecture. The students just really loved it. So we're gonna start. Hi Kai, hi Brisa. How are you ladies today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm happy to see you both. Really wanting to engage this so that we can really talk about this, the importance of Afro-Latino contributions, and archive the specificness of Afro-Latino contributions in the West Coast. So Kai, I want to start with you. What has been your experience as an Afro-Latina in the West Coast, specifically in Los Angeles?
So first, I grew up in Stockton. I was born in Portland, But in Stockton, I really didn't embrace myself because I was surrounded by people who didn't look like me that spoke Spanish, except for like a few family friends who were Afro-Panamanians. But around them, I felt very comfortable speaking Spanish, interacting, eating food, dancing. It felt very natural. But around my friends, anybody else, it felt very uncomfortable. And like I felt like an alien almost. And the racial experience growing up was so problematic. It caused me to erase the whole side of my identity. Like I didn't even associate anything or myself being Latina or anything Spanish. I just really wasn't a fan of it because I was always told, like, it was always gate kept from the community, and like, a lot of anti-Black comments and like, oh, a lot of racist things growing up. So kind of really spurned me from the community. So just identifying as Black was also problematic because I felt it was ignoring another side of me. And as Afro-Latinx folks, I feel like we have to understand that the racial project was so intense, and it's so intense that people continue to still believe that we don't exist, and it was meant to erase our existence and also meant to erase the existence of indigenous folks as well. So now I have to relearn parts of like my Latinidad. In Los Angeles, it was quite similar. People kept pushing back and talking about my Afro-Latinidad and the anti-Blackness, and they were like mad when I talked about anti-Blackness. And the hypervisibility of Mexicans and Salvadorans is often masked, but like people don't realize that space isn't comfortable for everybody. Like, yeah, there might be a lot, like, lots of streets named after people who are, Mexican, or there's cultural centers, but like I'm not welcome in those spaces. So is it really comforting to me to have a whole city based upon my supposed existence when I'm not even allowed in those spaces? So people would even know, like, Pico, like, the street was named after the last Mexican governor of California who was Black. And everybody's like, oh my God, really? And I'm like, yes, it's just, it felt like I kept on surprising everybody, and I kind of felt like almost like a minstrel, people were like, speak Spanish, dance, and it kind of became some, like, obsession, and it was never an in-between. So I kind of had to navigate on my own, and that's what kind of led to me creating my own space. And I didn't really want to debate about my existence. So like Dr. Lacayo's class really helped me, having supportive friends and family members. And like people really introduced me like, she's not Black, she's Latina. So, I literally had to create my own space and separate myself from people trying to erase my existence literally in front of my face. So, I'm a Black person and I'm Latina, and nobody's ignorance, confusion or bigotry can change that.
Absolutely. And Kai's voice was very critical in the class. And what a lot of students actually began to speak about is their own anti-Blackness within their families. And there was a lot of difficulty and challenging moments in the class, but there were also points of healing and understanding, as many of the students had taken the grunt of being and treated as being the darkest person in the class. So similarly, Brisa, can you tell us about your parents, how you came to identify as Afro-Latina, and what that means to you?
Definitely. So my parents met first day of orientation at the University of Iowa, and my dad was the very stereotypical 1990s militant Black man, and my mom grew up in a very small town in Illinois, and she was what you would expect a small town Mexican girl to be like. And so their origin story is really interesting to me because while my mom was there throughout, his young development, it wasn't really until I was born that they had to contend with the fact that they have this now multicultural interracial relationship. And growing up, I very vividly remember being educated and raised as a strong Black woman. And my mom went along with it and encouraged it because they both were really aware that when I walked down the street, when I entered into spaces, when I applied for jobs, the world was going to racialize me. They were going to see me as a Black woman. And it wasn't until I got older and I realized there were other parts of my identity. Like I spoke Spanish. I was very interested in, having a quinceañera, and all these like cultural, small, maybe seemingly insignificant things started to become more and more important to me as I started to get older. And so with that, there was this tension within our family because there was this long stint of me just being Black. And I knew, and we all knew I was Mexican, but Blackness was always brought to the forefront. And so very similar to Kai, I had to learn within myself, well, what does it mean to be a Black Mexican? What can that look like? What can that feel like? And what does that require really? And what that turned into was having to go to college and learn, like, what is Afro-Latinidad? I couldn't be the only one, and I felt very much, especially growing up in northern Texas. Like, I was the only Afro-Latina that could ever exist. And so through my college education, I studied, African American studies, Latin American studies, Latino studies, diaspora studies. And I started realizing that, and it seems very elementary, but Blackness and Latinidad are not monoliths, and that there are mixed Black people there are mixed Black people in Mexico, there are mixed Black people in Brazil, but there are also Black people in Guatemala that have been there for generations. And so really learning about the diversity of Blackness and Latinidad helped me understand where is it that I can position myself, where I feel comfortable and accepted, but also where I feel like I can be who I want to be without shame and with a lot of pride. And in a weird way, I think my education is the most important part to my identity development, because I was allowed to ask all these really hard questions around people who also didn't have the answer. And as a result, it came to mean the world to me. And that's exactly why I'm still in education, because I feel like there are still quite a few questions that need to have some answers.
Absolutely. And both of you have been doing that critical work, and have been, again, continuing that line of contributions of Afro-Latinos. So Kai, tell us how you came to establish the first Afro-Latino student organization at UCLA, again, which is one of the first in the country. Tell us how that came to be, and what are some of the things that the organization partakes in?
So I don't know if you can see my shirt. I'm repping it right now. And to be honest, actually, each one of these people is a member either of our organization. One's actually me. So we actually used our faces on the logo because I really wanted to be inclusive as possible. See the different hair types. So that's just a little brief. I feel like our shirt kind of encompasses our organization. So it was a long story. I feel like I kind of briefly mentioned being in Los Angeles and growing up and how I never really felt connected. And I was just so tired, of complaining without action. I'm tired of not having a home. I'm tired not to go on a party that's a Black party. Stop playing that Spanish music when I go to a party where there's Latinx folks who are staring at me who's this Black girl? So it's I really was okay, I want to go somewhere where I can have my own fun with my own people who might not even have to be Black and Latinx, but just people who understand and don't need to have a racial genealogy history every time I interact with them. Just that. So I met somebody online. Her name was Kiana. Actually, she's a Garifuna from North Carolina, or she went to school in North Carolina. And I saw that she created her own organization at her HBCU about being Afro-Latina. And I was like, yo, that's so dope. I learned so much about Garifuna from folks from her. And I was DMing her oh, how did you do this? What should I do? And then she's just do it, girl. And obviously she couldn't give me much help because it's still your own organization in different school systems. But I feel talking to her and seeing somebody else do it really inspired me. And she was making t-shirts and stuff like that. And I was if somebody else can do it, I can do it. I know she's at a HBCU and I know I'm at a PWI, but I'm gonna try my best, despite that. And then I talked to my friends. My close friends really instilled in me, you're Kai, you've been complaining about this forever. If you don't do it, we're going to fight you. We'll create the club for you. I was on the floor of my friend's dorm room and, trying to make a constitution really quick and a mission statement just to fill the deadline for the club, acceptances. So it was just kind of I was really timid because didn't want to do a lot of work, which is hilarious. And I'm a pre-med student, so it was why do I want to do this? Why do I always get myself, I feel caught up, into doing things that are more work for myself. But I really feel even though it's more work, it's still beneficial, not only for myself, but for people in general. I never realized how much effort I put into space could cause so much healing for other people. So also I had some friends who I knew were Black and Latinx, so it was kind of word of mouth, and it's oh, I have a friend, who's Columbia, I have a friend, and it was you know what, let's bring all our little friends together and meet up together. And I would put on Twitter, it was hustling, put on Twitter, hey, is anybody Black and Latino, anybody who's Afro Latinx? And I had one of my friends who's actually the vice president now, Kathy, she DM'd me, and she's Garifuna, and she's hey Kai, I don't know you, but I go to UCLA, I saw your tweet. We met up, and all of us started meeting up in my friend's dorm room because she was an RA, and that's all we had because I didn't know how to rent a room. I didn't know how to do anything. So, we started on a dorm room literally when I started the club, and then also we started doing meetings in my friend's dorm room as an RA. So also, if you didn't have those privileges as having a friend with an RA or having somebody I knew a friend who worked in Seoul, like I probably wouldn't have even done the club, or because it was just so many barriers. So a lot of it was self-starting, and also I feel like a lot of trial and error. So I wasn't familiar with UCLA. Before this, I wasn't really involved in orgs. I was like, oh, I was too involved in high school. Let me cancel everything out and adjust. So it was like going from like 0 to 100. So everything was trial and error, and I kind of wrote everything down, learned everything, and just kept track. But a lot of it was like, I feel like friends, family support, and also just in general, I see like a brief view of our organization. Our mission statement, is to bridge the gap between the African diaspora and Latinx communities, as well as educating those on Afro-Latinxes in our existence. And I feel like it's important to bridge the gap because people still acknowledge us, yet still put us into boxes. So like, what's the point of saying, hey, y'all are Afro-Latinx, and still be like, y'all can't do that. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, still acknowledge me as I'm a whole person that has two different groups. And I still feel like just because we're acknowledged as for existing doesn't really mean that we're included and given the respect and attention that we deserve. So that's important for me as well. We've had so many things for our club. We had traditions like De-Stress with Dance, where we taught like culture relevant dances. Shout out to Dr. Lacayo for teaching us about like, bachata and merengue and bomba. And we did like dances like that that have like significant African heritage, like teaching about, these dances and also telling people how to do them. So it was like people come out, we do it during finals week or right before finals. So like, to de-stress with dance. And then we also do like, Black Bruin dances. So we taught like a lot of folks like the Black Bruin step, the electric slide, and like the K-Wangs, like other certain like Black Bruin things. So it's like we try to like incorporate both sides, like, like some people, because a lot of us are also African American or grew up here in America. So it's like you have the Afro-Latinidad, but also you also have this hip hop, African American. We grew up, in the hood and California. So it's like you can't just deny your actual roots. And then also random things like we had our triple GBM with Mecha, which is like, it's technically Mexican centric, but is kind of formed as the Latinx organization usually on campuses, and also with ASU, the African Student Union. So that was really big to have a solidarity meeting between the two, and they try to do it quarterly. And like a lot of other things like that. We have plenty of workshops. We have the anti-Blackness presentation. We go to the Latinx Admin Weekend and give that presentation. We did a panel. We did all these workshops. The list goes on. We have bonfires, parties, you name it. But definitely education first. And I'm really proud that I was able to give my organization to two wonderful ladies who are actually leading it while I'm gone, which feels so weird.
I really appreciate it, Kai, and I has mentioned to them before that I was gifted with a sweater that my daughter, my Afro-Latina daughter, usually has in her room. And I think what's also beautiful is that in the back it says, ¿Por qué no los dos? Which is why not both? Meaning this idea of that people have to choose one or the other. When Afro-Latino folks are saying, I'm both, I'm proud to be both, I'm very happy and to be both. And I love that it's in Spanish because it's in somehow speaking back to Latinos about that. So our last question to Brisa, the students have loved your guest lecture that is based on your MA paper about the anti-Blackness in Mexico using art history. Please tell us about this paper and its contributions to the Afro-Latino literature research.
Well, what's funny about this paper is that it actually started, or the idea of it was born my sophomore year in college, where I actually, for the first time, saw Walter's Blaxican public exhibition on Instagram, and I thought, okay, so it's not just me. And then shortly after I saw that, then I was in a Latino class where we watched Henry Louis Gates' Black in Latin America. And I was like, this is it. Like, I have to pursue this as something to study, or I'm just going to fall apart as a person because there's too many signs coming back to back. And so when I finally did get to do my master's thesis, I knew that I was really interested in understanding this idea of representation and how art plays into what is Blackness, what is Mexicanness, what is Latinidad. And what's funny is what I was thinking I was going to do is how Afro-Mexicans represent themselves. But what I ended up discovering is that there's this long history of anti-Blackness through our beloved muralistas, through our beloved, ideology of mestizaje that you take for granted when you're in a Latin American studies or Latino studies course, because the way these ideas and ideologies are taught are very celebratory about, Latin American essentialism and acceptance and racial mixing and diversification. And so when I started looking in the archives and I started reading actual, statements from people living in Mexico, I realized that there was something a little bit more sinister to how Mexico has created its national identity and how Mexico has decided to represent who is an ideal citizen. And so I think what this does for the field, or what this does for the discipline, is really bring together some multi-layered questions on what is Mexicanness, what is identity, and who has been excluded. And I think the most exciting part of this research for me is that the Afro-Latin field itself is very, very small and growing rapidly, but even smaller within that field is the Afro-Mexican discipline or the Afro-Mexican focus. And so I really am excited to see kind of what are the new things that will come from this paper that I'm hoping to get published in the next year or two. So keep a lookout. But really seeing what can we say now if we start to question or interrogate so much of what we considered normal or taken for granted about Mexican identity and Latinidad more generally, when we're considering terms like mestizaje, or when we're looking at, concepts of mejor la raza or avanzar la raza. What does that look like now in this global conversation, in this transnational conversation, but most importantly, in an intersectional way where we're looking at Indigenous and Black folks specifically?
Thank you so much, Brisa. You've heard this brilliance here from two Afro-Latina Bruins. So proud, and they will continue their work and continue to add to the Afro-Latino literature and experience. And so again, we want to thank Kai and Brisa, and thank you all. And this is Celia Lacayo. We'll catch you next time.